If you're a web developer, you've probably heard of Jamstack. Coined in 2015 by the CEO of Netlify, Matthias Billman, Jamstack consists of pre-rendered static HTML that relies on client-side APIs and JavaScript to provide interactive elements. Some of the many pros of Jamstack is that it's fast, scalable, cheap, secure, and SEO friendly. There are a lot of popular Jamstack frameworks. The main ones are Next.js, Next.js, Gatsby, Hugo, and Jekyll. Out of these 5, Next.js is by far the largest in terms of market share, beating out second place Next.js by over 3 times. In this video, you will learn Next.js by building a developer portfolio complete with a blog. You will also learn some other awesome technologies in the process, like Chalker UI, NextMDX Remote, Next SEO, Vercel, and more. As always, all the code for this video can be found on my GitHub. To create a Next.js website, we can use the command yarn create next app. When we run this command, all the necessary files will be created. The Node Modules folder holds all of our yarn and npm packages, such as React Bootstrap, Lodash, and Next. The Pages folder holds, you guessed it, our pages. For example, index.js can be reached at the root of our website. In development, this is http://localhost port 3000. If we created a blog page and called the file blog.js, that page can be reached at localhost/blog. There are 2 exceptions to this. The first is _app.js. This is a special file in Next.js. It is the entry point to our app. At the bare minimum, app.js includes a function that returns the page component. We can also import global CSS, add custom error handling, and do a couple of other advanced things inside of here. We'll be coming back to this file in a bit when we add Chalker UI for our CSS framework. The second exception is _document.js. This file is optional because Next.js provides it if we don't create it. If we need to add something to the HTML or body tags of our site, we will need to override this file. We can do that easily by creating it and adding the following code. One of the nice things about Next.js is its support for dynamic routes. Because we are making a developer portfolio, let's say we have a bunch of projects. We can create a folder called project, and inside of it create a file called project.js. The brackets tell Next that this route will be dynamic. Now, if we navigate to the following route, we don't see any errors. We can also replace the 1 with a 2, and that works as well. What if we wanted to grab that dynamic route and display it to the user? We can use Next router for this. Inside of our file, import useRouter from next/router. Declare a variable router and set it equal to the useRouter hook we just imported. We can now use this variable to access a bunch of different properties. In our case, we can grab the dynamic route using router.query. Now we can use this anywhere inside of our component. The final thing you will notice inside of the Pages folder is the API folder. This is where any API routes will live. Because Jamstack does not have a server, all of the data and authentication can be done using API routes. Next provides us with a simple example in which we are returning some JSON. This can be accessed on the route localhost port 3000/API/hello. We can also consume this API endpoint inside of our application and display the data to the user, which we'll see in a bit. The next folder is the public folder. Inside here, we can put any static images, GIFs, favicons, text files like robots.txt, and XLM files such as our sitemap. The last folder is the styles folder. Here we can add any CSS or Sass style sheets. We can go ahead and delete this folder because we will be using Chalker UI along with CSS in JS to style our app. Now that you have a high-level understanding, let's start building our developer portfolio. Let's first add Chalker UI to our app by adding the yarn packages. This is not a tutorial on Chalker, so I will not be going into much detail on it. However, I do have a lot of Chalker tutorials on this channel if you are interested. Next, all we need to do is wrap our app with the Chalker provider inside of _app.js. The first thing we want to do is create a page layout component that we can use in every page. Create a folder named components, and inside of it, create a file named container.js. Go ahead and add the following code. The children text you see is the content for each page. Next, let's create our navbar component. Create a file named navbar.js and another file named darkmodeswitch.js. For the dark mode switch, we are simply using Chakra's toggle color mode hook to determine the current color mode and style accordingly. I am also using Chakra icons in this example, so you will need to import those. Now inside of navbar.js, import the switch component. There are two things I want to point out inside of this navbar that are Next.js specific. First, we are using useRouter again to style the active item differently. Router.pathName gives us the slug. Second, we are using next/link, which is a special Next.js component. It acts like an A tag, but is for client-side transitions between routes. It is common to wrap next/link around an A tag. If you do this, be sure to use the passhref property, otherwise you will render two A tags and hurt your SEO. Now that our page container component is complete, let's import this into index.html. Let's also add some basic information to this homepage, like name, description, and a simple call to action. Let's take a look at one of the best features of Next.js, API routes. Earlier in this video, we took a look at hello.js, which is a simple API route. Let's create our own API route to fetch our GitHub repositories from our GitHub account. We can do this using SWR. SWR is a React hook created by the Next.js team. It handles caching, revalidation, focus tracking, refetching on interval, and much more. To use it, we first need to import it. We can then use it like such. We now have the data returned stored inside of a variable data, and if we have any errors, it will be stored inside the variable error. The data is coming from the API route github.js, a file we will create momentarily. Let's first add 3 return statements to handle our different states: an error state, a loading state, and a success state. Now inside of the API folder, create a file named github.js. The syntax for an API route is as such, where rec is an instance of http.incomingMessage, and res is an instance of http.serverResponse. We can now use vanilla JavaScript to fetch data from the GitHub API. As always, refer to GitHub's official docs for any help with this. Back inside of projects.js, we can map over the data and display it. You can see we can also get the length of the data using data.repos.length. Recall earlier in this video, we made a dynamic route accessible on localhost/projects/PID. We can take advantage of that here by linking to that route, passing in the project name. Then, from this page, we can fetch additional data on that project, or we could even pass it as part of the query string. I'll leave that as an exercise for you guys. To create a blog, we'll be using Next.mdx remote. We can store blog posts wherever we want because we will be using getStaticProps to fetch them. In this video, and in most cases, storing them locally is the best option. Let's create a folder called Posts and add our first blog post. We can store the important parts of the post, like the title, description, and publish date, in what's called the front matter. The rest of the content can be added below as Markdown. One of the cool things about MDX is that you can add interactive JavaScript components inside of the post. Let's go ahead and add our dark mode switch. Now that we have a blog post, we can create a page named blog.js, and inside of here, we'll query all of the posts and display them in a list view. Before we do this, we will need some information regarding the path to the posts. Let's make a new folder called lib and a new file called mdxutils.js. This file will export 2 variables, the path to our blog posts and a list of all the mdx files inside of this path. Be sure to add fs and path via yarn. Inside of our blog.js page, import both of those variables as well as fs, matter, and path. Gray matter is a new package, so be sure to add that via yarn. Inside of getStaticProps, we can declare a variable named posts and map over all of our blog posts, which are stored in the post file paths variable. We can get the source of each post using fs and then extract the content and data using gray matter. Finally, return all the posts as a prop. Now we can pass the posts prop into our component and map over each of the posts, displaying them to the user. We are using the as property on the next link, which is the path shown in the browser URL bar. You can see that we can grab any part of the front matter by using post.data. The name of it, so title or description. The final step is to make a dynamic page for each individual blog post. Inside of our blog folder, create a file named slug.js. Add the following imports and our basic post page body. Inside of getStaticPaths, declare a variable paths and set it equal to postFilePaths. Recall, this is being imported from mdxutils.js and represents a list of all MDX files inside of post's path directory. Next, remove file extensions for page paths, and finally map the path into the static paths object required by Next.js. Then return the paths and set fallback to false. Inside of getStaticProps, we are doing something very similar to what we did in blog.js. Instead here, we are only working with one blog post, the requested one. Declare a variable post file path and set it to the current URL. Grab the source of the post using fs. Next, parse through the source using gray matter. Finally, serialize the content and pass in any MDX options such as Prism for code styling. Then return the source and front matter. In our page component, pass both of these variables in. We are setting the content of the post inside of the tag MDX remote. You can see we're also passing in the source and something called components. The components are what the markdown maps to in HTML, and it is also where we pass in our custom components. For example, we can declare a custom A tag like such. We can also set our dark mode switch equal to our dark mode switch component. At this point, we have a simple developer portfolio with a home page, a projects page, a blog page, and a blog index page. Now, if nobody can find the site, it doesn't do us any good. So to make this site rank well in Google, we need to add SEO. We can do that inside of Next.js by using the package Next.seo. Once we have this, create a file named next-seo.config.js. Inside of here, add our default SEO, such as the title, the description, the chronicle, and a couple of other info. As you can see, this package also accepts Open Graph. Once we have that, import our Next.seo config file and our default SEO from the Next.seo package inside of _app.js. Add this right above our page props component. So right now, all of our SEO is the same for each page. However, we want to change it based on the page we're on. To do this, let's open up index.js, import Next.seo from Next.seo, declare our variables URL, title, and description, and we can use it inside of our page as such. Now go ahead and do this for each of the pages, so index, projects, and blog. Now the SEO for individual blog posts will be a bit different. Inside of our components folder, create a file named blog.seo.js. Import Next.seo from Next.seo and also import article.json LD. This will take our SEO one step further and tell Google that this is an article. Declare a variable date, making it a new date, and we can add a featured image if you have one. This could be an image for the blog post itself, given in the front matter, or it could be the featured image for your entire site, which is stored in the public folder. Finally, return Next.seo, passing in all of those variables. And secondly, return the article.json LD, also passing in all of those variables. Always refer to the Next.seo documentation for more info. Once we have that, inside of slug.js, import our blog SEO component and add that right above of our container. Now we need to pass in the front matter, and we also need to pass in the URL. So to get the current URL, we can use useRouter. And then we'll add a variable slug, and we'll set that as router.asPath.replace/blog with an empty string. We can then concatenate that to our URL/blog. After all this work, our website is finally complete. Most tutorials on YouTube would stop here, but I'm going to show you how to ship this website. Vercel is the company behind Next.js, so it makes sense to deploy it there. Navigate to vercel.com. If you don't have an account, go ahead and create one. It is 100% free forever on the hobby plan. Before we deploy our website, it needs to be on GitHub or another Git platform. Once that is done, click the New Project button and select your project repository. You will need to add the Vercel app to your GitHub account so it has permissions. Give your app a project name if you want a different name from your GitHub repo, and add any environment variables if you have any. We did not use any in this crash course. Finally, click Deploy. After a few minutes, you should be able to see your site live. I hope you enjoyed this crash course on Next.js. We only covered the basics and skimmed past a lot of cool features, so here are some resources to keep learning. As always, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and be sure to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one.